participants and accompanying guests and anyone else who wants to come. So Victoria is going to be talking about Maori astronomy, a subject for which she is very passionate. She is part of the Ngai Tahu iwi, that is the iwi in the, by far the most important iwi in the South Island of New Zealand. And she lives in Dunedin, which is in the Otago. This is for those of you from overseas who want to know about Maori iwi. And she's going to be talking about the myriad of stars, our constant connection. Let me say that Victoria also played an important role in establishing the Dark Sky project, which was opened earlier this year in Tahu. And that Dark Sky project was a joint project with the former company Earth and Sky, which is now renamed Dark Sky Project, and Ngai Tahu Tourism. And they got together and formed this joint venture to build that building and run the Dark Sky Project. And Victoria was very much involved. So the Dark Sky Project, as you will have discovered if you've been there, shows the Maori connection with astronomy in a major way. So let's welcome Victoria Campbell to talk about the myriad of stars.
Tēnā tātou, ko auraki te mauka, nohona ko pūkaki. E reri ana a pūkaki kia waitaki, a ngaia te reo erekehu I tipu aki te tai wārai pēu e mihi ana. Kia ora everybody, as John said, my name is Victoria and it is my honour to be a part of this Starlight Conference and share some kōrero or stories with you tonight. I'm going to link back and talk about my mihi, which was the introduction that I just provided in Te Reo Māori very shortly. But before we do that, I'm going to let you know what treats you're in for tonight. And I've written them down so that I don't forget and also help keep me focused because once the news settle down a little bit, you'll see that I quite enjoy chewing the facts. So hopefully you're going to enjoy that too and participate in some dialogue with me. So the things that I hope to talk about tonight, first of all I'm going to explain who Māori are and more specifically provide a Kai Tahu perspective or a Ngai Tahu perspective about the significance of the sky and its status. I'm going to share some insights into our origin narratives and how these inform our worldview and practice. I'm going to talk about how we connect with the stars and provide examples of how our observations and our beliefs govern our interaction with the natural world. I'm going to share a couple of stories about particular constellations which will explain our method of retaining and transmitting knowledge. And then I'm going to conclude with some key messages about the dark sky and its status. So that's what I hope to achieve tonight. But I'm going to flip back to this first PowerPoint slide that I've got, and it says ko waio, and that means I am water, but it also, if it had a question mark, would be asking, who am I? And at the start, you might have heard some familiar landscapes, auraki, the mountain, pūkaki, the lake, and waitaki, the awa. That was a unique way of me utilising those landscapes to locate myself within this world. And it might be what you would call the equivalent of GPS coordinates. And so the purpose of mihi is to connect oneself with people and with place. And so me sharing a little bit about my whakapapa or my ancestry, I hope has built a little bit of a connection with us all this evening. You see there's a lovely picture of Aoraki with the Milky Way above, the beautiful lake Pukaki and the Waitaki Awa, and there's a picture picture of me at a Māori conference, or a wānaka as we call them, that's held annually for my tribe, and that's where we celebrate te reo Māori, our Māori language, te reo Tahu, our particular dialect, and about our narratives and our history, and we build and strengthen that knowledge and understanding, and then go forth and conquer. And so those are part of my iwi kaitahu. Okay, to start setting the scene and to help give you some information so that you can follow along some of the concepts that I'm going to talk about, I want to explain the Māori worldview. And so the first thing to know is that we believe in an open system. And so what that means is we believe there's something more than that of the everyday experience. We believe there is more out there than what we just see. And to quote the Transformers and the Autobots, there's more than meets the eye. The other thing about the Māori worldview is that we personify the world. And so we use the tool whakapapa, or genealogy, to connect ourselves with other people and with our landscape and the universe. And so we see the earth and sky and the universe as realms of our ancestors, of our demigods and our gods. And the way I introduce myself with my mihi mihi, using those landscapes named after my ancestors or their deeds, is another example of that personification. And then the other concept that I'd like to explain is whakapapa, which in its simplest form is described as genealogy, but it is way more than that. Whakapapa is the fabric of Māori social organisation. It's a process, it's a way in which we order the world and our interactions within it. And it's a theory, it's a process, and it talks about our relationships. So hopefully these concepts will help you follow some of my kōrero this evening. So, in a typical Māori fashion, in order to go forward, we look to the past. And so I'm going to take you back in time, I'm going to explain who kaitahu are, and then after that I'm going to take it all the way back to what some people describe as the Big Bang. And so kaitahu, in this modern day, we are the third largest iwi here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with a membership of over 54,000 people and growing. Now, for some of you who may be have travelled abroad and not overly familiar with Māori culture, and you might think, how can you become a member of a tribe? Is it just a case of signing up? Our iwi was actually the first to conduct a census or a survey. We took stock of who was here in a particular point in time, and that was in the late 1800s. And it is through that record, that collection, that database of our ancestors, we're able to trace our lineage back to that time, which in turn links us further and further back. And so in order to become a member of the iwi, of the tribe, you must show a line of descent to at least one of those ancestors that were recorded at that time here in the South Island. So that's the modern day iwi minus quite a few major details, but I'm going to take it back a little bit further. And so through observation and familiarity with the sun, the moon, the stars, cloud formation, currents, wave patterns, migrational behaviour of seabirds and marine life, and of course the trade winds, my ancestors were able to use the deep and complex knowledge and understanding that they had about the celestial bodies to navigate their way here to Waiponamu over 800 years ago. And so the first people were Waitaha. And Waitaha came here on a big seafaring waka or boat called Uruwal. And in our night sky, we have a constellation that looks very similar to a waka that is named Uruao. And these constellations serve as a reminder of that tradition in our arrival here. And to speak more specifically about this location here, Lake Takapō, this lake was attributed to the captain of that waka, Uruao, and his explorations here in the South Island, and all of these inland lakes are named after either him, someone on board his ship, or some type of deed that they may have done at that time. And so the other thing is the sky from a Māori lens is filled with a myriad of waka or boat constellations. And as the example I showed you with Waitaha and the Uruao waka, these are all there serving as a reminder of our history and help us to transmit that knowledge. The second wave of people, they came by land. They come from the North Island, they were Waitaha, Mānui, and through warfare and intermarriage, the two iwi, or the two collectives, become interwoven. In the 16th century, the last of the pre-contact migrators came also from the north, under the leadership of our eponymous ancestor, Tahu, and that was around the 16th century. And so once again, through warfare and intermarriage, the three iwi or people become interwoven, and we're now collectively known as Ngai Tahu or Kai Tahu. Probably thinking, why is she saying Ngai and Kai? It's a dialectal variation, so although it's the same language, it has its own dialect. And the trend seems to be, if you're south of the Waitaki, so the big river that runs down the valley there, if you're south of that, you tend to use the K rather than the NG. And so, of course, I was born and raised along that southern coastline, and so the K is the dialect that I use. So I'll be switching in between to keep you on your toes. And so, I've lost my place now. Where are we? Mānui, Tahu. Yeah, so once again, through warfare and intermarriage, the three become woven and all have lineage back to that ancestor Tahu. And that's where we get our name from. Kai Tahu means the people of Tahu, or in elongated, the people of Tahu. So fast forward a little bit, we were an entrepreneurial people, we were seasonal migrators. So we worked the food resources throughout Te Wai Pounamu, and we utilised the waterways to transport those goods on mokahi, or canoes made out of reeds that you can harvest from the lakes at particular times. And so we would use those waterways as well as our traditional trails to come inland and work the coastal areas. And in fact, if we went back in time a few hundred years, we would be at one of the most abundant supermarkets of its time. So this inland area was renowned for bird life, weka, kiriru, or the wood pigeon. You're not allowed to eat these things anymore. Titi in the south, the rakiura, and tuna or eels. So that became our lifestyle. So we stopped sea voyaging because we had enough land and resource to not have to move anywhere else, and I don't think there's anywhere else south of this that we could have gone to. But we were able to settle, and so those food resources really started to inform our identity and our knowledge of the celestial bodies, time tracking through the sun and the moon. That knowledge then informed our mahika kai practice, or our food gathering and harvest practices. And I'm going to share some constellations very shortly that talk to those practices and its application. Okay, I think we're ready for the next slide. Yes, so I've talked briefly about mahikakai and its application. So mahikakai really is just about food. It's about food resources, how you access them, how you gather them, and another way of securing a food resources is through marriage. So if I wanted to come up these ways and start skiing on Roundhill, then I would want to find a nice local man to marry and then have a stronger connection to that mountain and in turn spend a bit more time on it skiing. But I'm already married and got my food source secured somewhere else, so that won't actually be happening, just an example. But as I said, mahikakai really become our way of life, and our connection with the stars and reading the sky was imperative to doing that well and, as I said, tracking time and season. And I want to pick up on a point that Robert, for some of you who were in the conference today, Robert talked about the desire for us to, well, the shift firstly from a hunter-and-gatherer society. So I'm like, this is what my ancestors did, we were hunter-and-gatherers. And then this desire to read, and so with that, and read at night. So, hence come light and light pollution. Well, for me, that's almost an oxymoron because, in fact, traditionally, when it became night, we read the sky. So the sky was embedded with stories about our histories, and we read the stars to determine weather patterns and to determine how our food resources and plantings would go. So I'm totally on board. Let's get back to reading the sky or reading books inside with the curtains pulled. And I'm certainly going to be an advocate for that, and that's part of the angle and the messages that I hope to continue to share with a wider community in Tahu, and also to collaborate with people like the board that strive to sustain dark sky status. Okay, so that's mahikakai. Origins, we're going to go all the way back now. Just at this point, I'm happy for some interaction. Before we go any further, did anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask about some of the things I've talked about? We can have questions at the end as well, but you might have forgotten because I might overwhelm you with something else that's unusual. So definitely happy to see if anyone had anything to ask. We'll keep going in. Excellent. Okay, so going all the way back in time. The first thing we have to remember, I talked about this context or this concept, whakapapa, and we've got to remember that it's complex and it's the way that we organise our world. And so, for us, our origin narratives or our creation narratives go all the way back to the celestial bodies. And in fact, one may compare it to a singularity. And so we view the world as Earth Sky, as Earth Mother, Papatuanuku, and Sky Father, Raki Nui. And the two were embraced together. And they had a multitude of children, however they occupied the darkness. There was no light in between the earth and the sky. And after what I would consider to be probably lots of discussions and heated arguments amongst siblings, they decided to separate the parents so that they could have light. And so in fact, that's what they did, and separated, and the earth and sky are now separate. And the children of the earth and sky, we personify them, but they're in fact the elements that are a natural world. And so, for example, Tani, god of the forest, we have Tāwhiri, he's our wind god, and we have Rehua. And for those of you who have already been down to the Dark Sky project, you'll see that the building there is actually named Rehua, and I'm going to talk about that very shortly and its significance. So that's the Big Bang in our view, or the singularity splitting open. Our oral narratives talk about chaos. So the brothers, the siblings, they were all fighting each other. And for me, if I look through a scientific lens, that's talking about the different elements fusing and moving around and doing all the things that astrophysicists will use a completely different language to explain. And when I do research and look into our oral our narratives around this origin, it's quite clear to see things like the periodic table, but described through whakapapa. And so we name these people the things that they represent. So for example, we have names for dark matter, and we have names for liquid, and these all get personified as gods and demigods and eventually linked down to us. So it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, so how did the stars come about? After the earth and sky were separated by Tāne, he noticed that his parents were naked, and so he sought clothing for his parents. And to clothe his mother, he sought plants and trees and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to focus on that story. I'm going to focus on the star bit. And so Tāne went into the realms because he's a god, and that's the other thing that Māori do, is we tell history through three layers. So we have the realm of gods, the realm of demigods, and then human. And so that in itself is an example of whakapapa, and it's about the ordering of a process, and it's about explaining the natural world through that lens. And so Tāne, because he can, he's a god, he took a space Uber up into the realms and went seeking for something appropriate to clothe his father. And after what I would consider to be a long journey, and I'm keeping it nice and short so that we get through this presentation tonight, he came across his brother, whetū, and he was a great weaver. And in Māori society we have cloaks. They can be made of all sorts of things, natural fibres and animal products as well. So a very valued item in Māori society. And Tāne come across his brother weaving this beautiful cloak made of stars. And another name for a cloak is a tōpuni. And so Tāne asked his brother for this cloak of stars to clothe his father. And of course, whetū agreed. And so Tāne then threw that cloak up to cover his father, and that in fact created all the stars, and that explains some of the patterns that we see within the stars. And then obviously over time we've laid stories as they come through those realms of gods, man-gods, through to human history, up into that storybook, which is our sky. And hopefully you're starting to see a bit of a picture that I'm trying to build around how important the sky is. Okay, I've talked about these guys. So another key thread of my presentation tonight is knowledge. I'm really happy that today during the conference a lot of the messaging was around education and around critical awareness. And my field of expertise isn't actually Māori astronomy, it's Māori language. However, and from a Māori worldview, the language is the gateway drug to knowledge. And so through my expertise in Māori language, I've been able to build my knowledge and understanding of Māori astronomy. And through a Māori lens, all of that sits in the realm of knowledge and our history and our identity. And so we have these wonderful tribal proverbs that have deep and meaningful messages in them and only are described in short words. And so I've chosen this one, no te kou ore wa he wai no rua whetū. That does not translate as knowledge is sacred and flows like water if we were to do a literal translation. But the interpretation or the meaning behind this whakataukī is about knowledge and how it flows. And so this whakataukī tells us about rehua. And as I said earlier, the Dark Sky Project, new home base, it's like I'm advertising for it. is named Rehua after the star. And you may know the star as, and I'm really bad at pronouncing star names, not a Māori, Antares, and not Antares, Antares. So we identify that star as Rehua. And the other thing that we do, and I want to bring this up now because you're going to think a little bit cuckoo later on, we see the stars as either female or male. And so when I talk about these stars, I'm going to say he or I'm going to say she. And that's once again another example of personification and whakapapa in effect. So my Māori worldview, the lens, the perspective in which I interpret the world, you'll see that coming through in the language that I use. And so Rehua is the star lord. He is like the big chief of the sky, and he's also accredited with giving knowledge to mankind. And the way that knowledge came about is his brother Tāne, who I've talked about. Once again, he's totally into his space travel, and he went up into the realms of the god to Antares or Rehua and asked for knowledge. And Rehua agreed to give him knowledge, and the form of the knowledge that he gave to Tāne was water. And so this whakatauki proverb talks about the appearance of knowledge as water, and so Tāne brought this back down to earth for us. And this is when I promise I'm going to speak on some lighter topics very shortly, but to help that make a little bit more sense for you. And for those of you who are familiar with anatomy, we all have fontanelle. And so when we're in the room, that's not quite joined up. And so when the baby is born and it comes out over time, the fontanelle will seal over and we'll have a secure skull. For us, that is where knowledge goes to and where it comes from. So this is the core, and we said the core o Rehua, or the fontanelle of Rehua. When he leant over, knowledge came out of his head and Tāne brought it down. And so what that really unpacks is a perspective about the forms of knowledge. And water, in this sense, is also a metaphor for DNA or our genetics. And so that also links to whakapapa as well. And so we believe that when children are born, when babies are born, they are born with all of the potential that they can ever need, because it's already come to them in their fontanelle, and it's been passed down to them through our ancestry, through our lineage. And in fact, it's the way that we nurture and support children that will help them reach their potential. So that's a little bit about knowledge and how we think about it. It's definitely complex. So I also just want to give another example of knowledge and knowledge transmission and how it all links back to the universe. So for those of you who are international visitors, marae are a cornerstone of Māori culture, and they're normally carved whare, a little bit like this beautiful marae that I've got here on the PowerPoint. This is raki marae, just up near Littleton in Christchurch. And this has a wonderful example of how we use our arts and crafts and apply this knowledge that we have in practice. And so, once again, the whare or the house is personified. We think of the roof as being raki nui, and the rafters as being those rounds that help the knowledge, that in fact when knowledge come down from the sky. And hopefully this is going to work. Yes. So we can see there that we've got the rafters, and on the side of the marae we have Tahu, or carvings. And these carvings are normally ancestors or gods that we honour. And what happens is that the place in which the rafter meets the po lands onto the fontanelle. And so this is an example of how we apply that knowledge into practice. And in fact, that point is also called rua whetū, which links back to the rehua story. Righty-ho. Oh, we're on to some constellations now. Let me just... Right, cool. So I've shared a little bit about our singularity, similarity, and about how we apply our knowledge and transfer that in many ways. I want to talk about a couple of constellations just to kind of hone the message in, and hopefully some of you will find it interesting. So this first constellation, some of you may recognise is the Southern Cross, or Te Pai Mahutoka as we call it in Te Reo Māori. This is a really important and significant constellation in the Southern Hemisphere. This is one of the constellations that my ancestors used to navigate here to Te Waipounamu, to the South Island. And for those of you who are familiar with the Southern Cross, when used correctly, it can help find the South Celestial Pole. This is also, through a Māori lens, seen as an anchor. And that space Uber that I told you about earlier, that Tāne travelled up into the realms, well, when you've got to get out and have a chat with the big bro about creating some knowledge, you need to make sure that the space Uber doesn't go and do another job. So he threw an anchor overboard, and in fact, this constellation for us is seen as that anchor that Tāne threw overboard. And there, I haven't got it in this picture, but there's a line of stars that come through that anchor, and we see that as the rope attached to the anchor, and that leads to the tail of Scorpio, or Scorpius. Once again, I'm not good with the English stuff. And that attaches to that very waka that I talked about, being Uruwa, but also Te Waka o Tamariri is the waka that Tāne travelled up in. And so you can see that when we look up to the sky and see the Southern Cross, we don't only see something that's going to help us navigate our way in the world. We see stories of our ancestors and their feats. Okay. Our next two constellations there, and I've just had a word with a friend who's a photographer saying I need to actually get a decent camera and start get some better images up here, but sorry, this has to suffice. So I just wanted to point out rehua, as I said, really important when it comes to knowledge. Rehua is where we think knowledge comes from. And then that's puaka, or Waijil, just above Orion, and for those of you who are from the other hemisphere, you'll see that that looks upside down. Here in New Zealand, we also see that as the pot, or a big shopping trolley, as my children like to call it, the shopping trolley. But puaka for us is one of the stars. She's a girl. She's associated with knowledge as well, particularly female knowledge, fertility, and I think I found the link why she's linked to fertility is because she's also linked to seasonality. And so it's all about time and timekeeping and keeping in sync with ourselves and the environment. And puaka is also a very celebrated star within Tahu because she helps to herald the new year. And so from a Māori lens, New Year isn't the 1st of January every year. The date varies, and it's actually associated to another cluster of stars as well, which we'll talk about very shortly. So that's puaka. I wanted to show her off. And then I've got this wonderful picture. Now, I've used this picture for a few reasons, and some of you might already hazard guesses to why I've used this. So this is a beautiful picture taken by a friend of mine, Nathan, down in Dunedin. It's at Arowana. Across the harbour is Otago Marae, where my wonderful husband comes from. And so this is a place that we stargaze from often. It's really good on the other side to look for Aurora Australis. And this is also the place that as a hapu, or as a smaller kinship group of our iwi, we go and stargaze and undertake particular practices that connect us to the stars. As you can see there, I've pointed out Matariki. Matariki, I think, is probably one of the most popular and well-known star clusters here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Pleiades, for those of you who don't recognise it, as I name her, Matariki. Matariki is the name of one of the stars in the cluster, but also the wider cluster itself is known as Matariki. And this particular cluster has stars associated with weather, in particular rain and the winds, and it also has stars associated with seawater, fresh water, and a few other things. And so this particular star cluster is utilised to read. So when I'm linking back now to that reading the sky, this is something that our ancestors always used to do. And a read for Matariki will help us indicate what type of weathers are coming ahead and what the planting and harvesting seasons are going to be like. And I do know from various research that there are a lot of other Indigenous cultures around the world that use this particular cluster for harvesting. So I'm sure that for all the science-based people out there, I'm sure there's some good projects that could help see or unpack why that may or may not be. Another reason why I chose this particular picture is because it also has an image of another constellation that we see through a Māori lens. So some might see this broken up into Orion and Taurus there, but through a Māori lens we see it as one great big constellation, and of course it's a boat one. And so boat constellations are a big theme in Māori society, and I think that's because we live on an island in the Pacific. So I think that may have influenced things. And once again, we personify the world and the skyscape, and obviously we keep it relevant to our everyday life practice and applications. And so we see this as the hull of the waka. If we come along, that there is te kokotā, or the sail of the waka, and then Matariki sitting up the front of the waka is like the carved figurehead at the front of the waka. And so this waka, for 11 months of the year, graces our presence. Every night it goes up and down and makes its way from the east all the way around to the west, and then sets again. And for those of you who are actual astronomers, we know that they don't really disappear, that they're still there, but from our perspective, once they're below the horizon or getting polluted by the sun's light, we consider them not to be there for a while. And so this waka goes around 6 for 11 months, and then it's out of our sight for about 4 weeks. This time can vary. And then what we do is, when we see it's the helical rising of Matariki during the right lunar phase, we take that as the Māori New Year. And so I'm just going to expand a little bit on that timekeeping theory. And so Māori keep track of time through what we call a lunar stellar calendar. And so what that means is that we take into account the position of the sun, the phase of the moon, what else? The helical rising of stars, and the environment. So those 4 things are all taken into consideration to determine time and seasonality. And our ancestors were also really clever and understood that the moon would get out of sync. You know, some other iwi or Indigenous people have 13 lunar months sometimes. We do too have that, and so every 3rd year, when we go to look helical rising of these stars, we look for a twin star. So for 2 years in a row, we take the top reading to gauge time, and every third year we wait for the two stars to be up in a particular point, and that helps recalibrate our season. And so hopefully you're starting to see why the stars and the sky are so important to us. And light pollution and not having dark sky status means that we are becoming disconnected with these practices and with the ability to be able to read and interpret the stars. Okay, we're nearly there, people. Okay, so, yes.
Can I ask a question at that particular point? I'm just supposing here, one of the things I've wondered about, particularly with Mother Wiki, is sort of like aligns with because we've got solstices and the equinoxes and things, and I've kind of wondered why we associate it with the rising of a star in the morning, or the constellation in the morning, that would be difficult to see before the sun washed out. Now, just from hearing you say that, I'm supposing that the big difference would be because of with exploring history and that to be part of life. You could do something, you could rely on something that others who are more centred and stuck in a particular place might do, which would be track the position of the sun rising across, moving across the horizon, and keep track of that, because you couldn't guarantee you're going to be in the same place.
Thank you so much for asking that question, because I actually skipped a little vital piece of information that I was supposed to share. So, as well as these four positions, to build on and hopefully answer the question that you talked about, Matariki is also really important because Matariki for us signals the sun to return to Earth. Now I need to tell you briefly about the sun. The way that we track time with the sun is we describe the sun as a male, and he is a really lucky guy because he's got two wives. And so he has a summer wife and a winter wife. And his summer wife is personified here in the warm soils of the earth. And so when we have the sun around us for a long time and we're warm and it's summer and people are out jet skiing on the lake, we interpret that as the sun spending time with the summer wife. And then slowly over time, as the sun starts tracking around, because we don't see ourselves revolving around the sun, our explanation is that the sun starts moving away from us, from the earth, because he's going to spend time with his winter wife, who is personified as the star Tahu or Sirius. And so when the star is tracking out that way, the sun, also a star, tracking out that way with that star, that helps us to explain, oh yes, that's what's happening. And then Matariki, and this is another reason why Matariki is celebrated as our star of the new year and really important for timekeeping, is that when Matariki, Sirius or Takurua and the sun all rise in the east at a certain point, we believe that Matariki signals, when they're all lined up, she signals to the sun that it's time to return back to his summer wife and leave his winter wife. And so when that happens, the sun slowly starts tracking back and rising more. So hopefully that kind of helps build on. Yeah, so we have stories that explain that, and so that would be the equivalent to like a solstice. Yeah, so once again, when the stars rise all together, it's like, oh, from this point on, the sun's going to start rising further and further southeast. Cool. Did that answer your question?
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. So, I wrote a couple of things down late this afternoon after being exposed to this wonderful conference, and I wanted to build on some of the knowledge and learnings that had been shared today. So, I'm starting to conclude now, people. I have tonight talked about knowledge and the importance of it, and as I said, it's been a key theme in this project about educating people and raising critical awareness. Now, I don't know whether it's been written in the stars for me or not, but these happen to be 2 of the 5 pillars of Māori language revitalisation, which is my speciality. And so I'm really aware of the power of giving something status, or raising or elevating the status of something, and also the need to raise critical awareness. And so, given that it's already part of the job that I do, I want to let you all know that dark sky status and the preservation of the sky is now aspects that I am weaving into the work that I do and the communities that I work with. And I have already started communications with our iwi to let them know that we need to be doing something about this, and we need to be supporting people like yourselves who share the same values and opinion about the sky and its significance. So I wanted to let you know, tick, we're doing that. And then I started thinking about, okay, how to conclude. And I wanted to say that the dark sky has enabled 32 generations of my ancestors to transmit knowledge and ensure its continuity. And I'm going to do all I can to make sure that we still have that ability to look up to the sky, to see those constellations, so that we are reminded of those stories, our history, our identity, and that we pass that knowledge on to future generations. As I said, the sky informs our practice, and I gave you an example of mahika kai, or food resourcing, when to plant, when to harvest, how to interpret weather patterns. And we need to be able to keep doing that. And in fact, mahika kai was one of the pillars of our claim that we settled with the Crown in 1998. And so that's a real high priority for us as an iwi. We need to be able to connect with the sky, because that's our whakapapa. The sky and the celestial bodies are our ancestors, and if we can't see them, then I couldn't imagine a world where that existed. So let's not even go there. So I feel the challenge: how can we continue to observe, read, and interpret the stars with light pollution? I don't have that picture up anymore. How can we connect to the stars and to the celestial bodies if we can't see them? And so, the challenge that I am putting out there for my iwi is, and I need to remind you, right at the start I talked about who we were, and I might not have said our tribal boundary. So our tribal boundary ranges from the north of the Kaikoura Ranges here in the South Island, right down to Rakiura, including the Mano Islands. And it was really nice to hear Amy speak earlier today, and she actually mentioned the Memorandum of Understanding, and one of those partners was in fact Te Rūnana o Awarua, who are like a chapter of our tribe, or they are the people who occupy that area and have authority for that area. So that's a really good example of how, as an iwi, we can be involved in preserving the sky. And so our territory, or takiwa, is 90% of the South Island and 40% of New Zealand's land mass. And so the challenge that I am championing amongst my iwi is for us to become the first iwi whose takiwa, or boundary, has dark sky status. And so hopefully if we can do that, that will give a little bit of hope for the people here on the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve Board, to know that, we might have 90% of the South Island and 40% of New Zealand. And I know later on in the conference, the Honourable Margaret Austin is going to be talking about dark sky status for the nation. And so I want to say that I'm going to do all I can to wave the flag for my iwi to do their part. and I think that that will lend well to applying for that status, and obviously there's 54,000 other people that are on board the course. So that is the challenge that I am putting out there for iwi. And so to conclude with, I put this in there because for those of you who are New Zealanders, the Treaty of Waitangi is very contentious, but one of the articles guarantees us access to our tauka or our taonga, things that we find valuable. And of course, the sky, we believe, is precious and invaluable. It is a tauka, and so I think we've got a little bit of leverage there that we can use to encourage the government in the rest of New Zealand to get on board this course. As I said, the sky, its status, it's about our whakapapa, and we value it. And as an iwi, as an organisation, we are values-based, and the goal of our organisation is to achieve the aspirations set by our people. And as I said, I'm about to put an aspiration out there that aligns with our tribal values, and the work that everyone's doing here does align with our tribal value of guardianship. And so we have a responsibility to the sky, and so just wanted to reiterate that point. And then to pick back up on what Robert said about reading at night, this was already in here, so that was quite fitting, is that I believe that the sky is the greatest storybook with pages still to be written and read. And that is my presentation. Hopefully it's not too tricky.
No, it's not a question, it's more a jumping on board with you and agreeing with you 100%. Obviously you'll know Runny Mano. He did his last round of talks, he spoke about Myriad astronomy and being able to tell the seasons, and he did make a comment on that round of talks that over the last 2 seasons he actually hasn't been able to read the stars because of the growing light pollution in and around our urban areas. So what we're doing as a country is actually taking away what we try and do as a people and connect with the stars and be able to read and tell our seasons. So he's on board as well, and he's identifying issues in and around the locality where he's from. And it's not so much of a problem down here, but yeah.
Let's not let it become a problem.
Exactly.
Can I ask, when did Waitaha first arrive in the South Island? Was it the same time as the first Maori navigators came to Aotearoa, or was it later? Or
That's a loaded question. So archaeological evidence will indicate around maybe 750 AD. For us, we record it through whakapapa, so we've got at least 32 generations. So for the mathematicians in the room, you could try and work that out. But it's about 800 years ago. And then what we do know through research by the likes of Professor Mātāmua is that there's a lot of connection throughout the Pacific around our stories about the celestial bodies. And in fact, we have those stories in our old traditions as well. In fact, the catalyst for leaving, which is when I lecture about this as a topic, I say it's the same reason that everybody leaves somewhere. You're fighting with somebody, and you're normally fighting with somebody over resources. And so it makes sense to me, as our ancestors populated Polynesia, once you get to a good island, have lots of resources, and you snuggle up by the fire, and population increase occurs, and then it's an island. And so there's only really limited resources, and so you've got to make the decision of whether you stay or you go. And our stories talk about a a time of disarray at that place that we come from, and so it was a choice to leave and find somewhere else to populate.
It's a pretty wonderful story because it's very much part of this village as well, with Rockaway and Rockaway Lane being a main street that immediately links back to we were on the first canoe, and so being down here, the names really talk about the stars, like even Tātai. Do you do any of that, like investigation in names? Like there's a debate going on around the country, around the village at the moment.
Is it Tikapo?
Yeah.
Is it Tātai?
And to me, going back to those really ancient, you get Te Kapo, the blind, it leads straight into the Taniwha. So Tātai and Tikapo is the same thing, going back far off.
Yep, so that's got a few aspects to the question. One of the great things that our iwi has been able to do is a project which is a cultural mapping project. And so we have had a research team and our archive team work with all of our iwi members to culturally map our boundary area. And so that mapping included place names, so where do these names come from? I'm going to say something controversial, so the stories that Kāti Huirapa, so from Awawhenua, and our coastline people, the names attributed to this particular area, we believe are Aro-Turu, or that's another waka that come here traditions. And so the story about the lake being in Taniwha, we believe actually comes from outside of our oral narratives, so perhaps it's coming from the north, so we don't actually promote that particular story. And Takapo, that's still a debated topic, and I've had the privilege of staying in this village for a few months while I was working on the Dark Sky project, and I'm still formulating an opinion on what the name could represent, so I'm leaving that one out there in the universe at the moment.
This is on the new year. So you said it's a combination of three things: the heliacal rising, the observation of the seasons, of indicators for the seasons, and the moon. So in the tradition that you know, is there a relation of why it's the moon? And the reason I'm asking is because the moon is, of course, a natural source of light at night. So is there something that is indicating that the calendar relates to the change of moonlight?
Absolutely. And once again, I'm not a professional, I'm totally an amateur, and I only know what I know, but what I do know about the moon is that the moon has obviously phases. And so with those phases of the moon, we have names for it. There are up to 33 different names for the phases of the moon. And so from a non-Māori perspective, you're like, oh, the moon has only a 29-45 day cycle. So the first thing to address is that we have the different names for the phases of the moon. Sometimes the moon can go through one or two phases in a night or in a period, so that helps to kind of explain that one. And we also, all of those names for the different phases of the moon describe the mood of the moon or the effect in which the moon has, either on our food gathering practices. And so, for example, they'll have not a good night for eeling, moths, when we've got a bright moon and so on and so forth. And so we do know that in certain phases of the moon we shouldn't be doing particular activities. And I always try to put a bit of a practical lens on things. And so the new moon, or when the moon is dark, that phase of the moon is attributed to whetū, or for us, our god of darkness. And so we're encouraged not to do anything major at that time. And I think, that makes sense from a practical aspect. So back in the day, a few hundred years ago, you need to be cautious when you're out of the environment, especially when there's no moonlight. And then, so as I said, different phases represent things that you shouldn't or shouldn't do. And the most prosperous phase of the moon is the third quarter. So I don't know if there's any kind of research that's going on about the moon and its influence in the phases, but I do know, I do have a few friends who are academics, and one of them is actually looking at the health-related topics with the moon. And here in New Zealand, unfortunately, we have a high suicide rate, and research that's been undertaken actually indicates that there's a particular phase of the moon which happens to be around that fetal period that people do.